Welcome to Webinar 1, Part 1 of the Laredo Group course, Essential Media Terminology and Concepts. This course can be taken on its own or as part of the Laredo Group Media Professional Certification Program. Remember, you'll learn and retain much more if you take notes as the instructor presents and talks about the material on each slide. And if you're participating in the certification program, you'll also find your notes very helpful in studying for the certification exam. And now, let's begin. Here is your instructor for this webinar, Steve Letterman, Adjunct Instructor of the Laredo Group.
Hi, and welcome to Part 1. This is an introduction and overview of the media planning process. Webinar 1 is Part 1 of a 6-part series, beginning with the media planning process, Parts 1 and 2, defining markets and audiences for advertising purposes. We'll review media characteristics, the various attributes that each of the key media have, their strengths and their weaknesses. We'll discuss media math and key terms and many concepts that need to be understood in developing media plans. We'll cover broadcast media fundamentals. And in Webinar 6, we'll cover print and outdoor fundamentals. And now, these are the topics that will be covered in Parts 1 and Part 2 of this first webinar. We'll define media, what it is and what it isn't. We'll have a definition for what media planning is. We'll look at media planning in the form of a process wheel to understand the various steps along the way in the implementation of a media plan. We'll cover many of the planning considerations that go into the process. We'll address seasonality and timing considerations that go into a media plan. We'll talk about budgets. We'll look at media in a funnel to understand where various media fit in the execution of different types of campaigns. We'll cover the 2 basic media forms, the integration of media, which is so essential nowadays. We'll address branding versus direct response, 2 disparate types of campaigns that both have a purpose. We'll look at flighting techniques and how those are utilized to convey advertising messages. And we'll take a look at a media flowchart. So let's get into Webinar 1, Part 1. This is a primer of key media terms, but it's also much more than that. We'll be discussing concepts that are invaluable in the understanding of media planning and media buying, and where media fits in to the framework of advertising as a whole. So it doesn't matter who you are or where you are in the process, whether you're a media planner or buyer, a media seller, or a marketer. These are concepts that have to be understood. I've worked in my time with numerous account executives who did not understand thing one about media. And frankly, they were doing themselves and their clients a big disservice. If you're a planner or buyer, you'll want to know what's going on in the world around you, what your supervisors and your peers are talking about, and you'll want to advance in your career and be able to do a better job for your clients. If you're a media seller, you'll want to understand the thought process that your clients are going through to make you a better media seller. And if you're a marketer, whether you're in an in-house department or whether you're overseeing an agency, you'll want to understand these concepts to be able to do a more critical job of analyzing the process, managing your agency or managing yourselves, and get every dollar out of your advertising investment. So what is media? I was at a luncheon recently and speaking to several different people and mentioned that I was in media and media training in particular. There were 3 people who really didn't understand what I was referring to. One thought that I was in PR, public relations. A second thought that I was the media, that I worked for a newspaper group. And a third thought that when I said media training, I meant that I could teach them how to speak in front of a camera. And frankly, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about advertising media, which is an understanding and proper usage of the communication vehicles that are used in advertising, whether it's broadcast, magazines, newspapers, internet, digital, out of home, any form of advertising media through which promotional and advertising messages are conveyed. And really, this is big business because advertisers are literally spending big bucks for your time and attention to get in front of your face, to be heard, to be wherever you are. Advertising is an approximate $200 billion industry in the United States. In better economic times, it would probably be closer to $250 billion, and it will get there. The media landscape has changed dramatically over the last 20 or more years, and especially so in the last 5 years. If you know anything about advertising, for the last 20 to 30 years, you'd know that there was a time back then you could have a couple of really big ideas to drum up a very sizable advertising audience, whether it was a television program or an ad in a newspaper. You'd reach a large audience. That's not so anymore. One symptom of that change is fragmentation, the fact that individual media now have dwindling audiences. There are many more choices, not just for consumers, but for those who plan media. So media planning is much more difficult than it used to be. There are new media forms and vehicles popping up every day. There are more tools that need to be understood and applied in the process. And the bottom line for advertisers, as well as agencies, is there's a greater risk involved because there are many more choices and because advertisers are looking for the greatest return on their advertising investment, whether it's producing a great bottom line for Wall Street, whether it's selling more product. You've got to be able to make the right choices and be able to defend your choices. Back in 1985, advertising media planning was much simpler. There were 3 television networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC. There were about 7,700 radio stations and a handful of radio networks if you were interested in network radio. There were about 2,700 print options of all types and forms. And you had 4 basic types of outdoor. So let's fast forward 20 years. Yes, you have those same basic media forms, but now you've got 7 television networks. You've got almost 13,000 radio stations, almost 13,000 print options, 150 or more cable channels that the average household could receive. And on top of that, we've now got mobile, email, the internet, digital cable, high-definition television, DVD, video on demand, gaming. Gaming is so huge. Interactive TV, 500 digital channels that could possibly be received, and now digital out of home. In 2008, on top of those choices, you've now got ad exchanges, vertical ad networks, music downloads, PDFs, Twitter, the Kindle, advergaming, social networking, and look at what a phenomenon that's become. Back in 2005, Facebook didn't exist, and it's now got 300 million or more users. Video ads, podcasts, the list is going on and on. You can see how many more choices there are for media planners and for anybody that's looking to invest their advertising dollars. You've got to follow the consumer, and that's a big task for today's advertisers. Because as the consumer goes through their day, whether it's at work, at play, as parents, as students, they're constantly bombarded with advertising messages, whether they choose to participate and engage with those advertising vehicles or whether they see them in passing. So there's time spent with television, with radio, with print, with outdoor, with the internet, blogging, real simple syndication, RSS, mobile, video. Look at the average day and think of your day. Let's look at the time consumers spend with media according to this eMarketer exhibit. Looking at the internet, it's almost 11 hours per week. With television, also almost 11 hours per week between men and women. Gaming, it's huge and growing. 10 hours per week among men, 7 hours by women. Radio is almost 5 hours per week. Newspapers, anywhere from 1 to 2 hours per week. And magazines, approximately 1.5 hours per week. But still, that's a lot of time. And that's not every medium that's out there. So what are the implications for planners? As I said before, there used to be a big idea. Now there are no more big ideas. If you think of it that way, the only solution to the fragmentation problem is ubiquity. You've got to follow the consumer, be where they are, understand them well enough to know where they're going, what they're doing, and find a way to interact with them. There are increased measurement needs. Traditional media measurements have always been siloed, but that's changing. There are new standards required as advertisers now use cross-media approaches and use not just the traditional media, but the newer media. And it's an ongoing, evolving process, especially as more media and more tools come to the forefront. There's also a need to revisit the compensation models by which agencies are paid. Back in the day, agencies were paid a 15% commission for media placement, but that no longer applies. That formula has been out the window for years. And over the years, there's been bundling and unbundling of services, some agencies doing media, some not doing media. And now with interactive media, some agencies there are handling it and some are not. So compensation is an issue. Basically, as I said, there's no big idea anymore, but if there is one, it's an aggregation of many different effective ideas to target the consumer. So what is media planning? It's the process of selecting the advertising vehicles that will be used to achieve a given business objective or a marketing objective, given a specific budget. It's not a simple process. It actually requires a holistic approach, taking into account above the line or more mass as opposed to below the line solutions, being more targeted solutions. Media planning also has to achieve the most cost-effective solution to maximize ROI, or return on investment. Remember, this is about selling product or achieving a given bottom line. There are three basic components to a media plan. You've got to define the marketing problem. And every client has a problem that needs to be addressed, whether it's rolling out a new product or achieving a certain sales expectation. It's something that needs to be considered. You've got to translate that marketing problem or marketing requirement into an attainable media objective. And third, when you have those objectives, you then have to find a solution or define a solution for formulating the right media strategies. And like any long-term goal, it has to have a time frame, has to have an end date to achieve the result, and it's got to be achievable. I mentioned earlier that we would look at a process wheel. So let's do that. The first portion of this is what I call the discovery phase. It's understanding the marketing and advertising objectives, or developing those marketing objectives. In the traditional world, it usually requires an agency and a client sitting down to discuss what the client's objectives are, what their challenges are for the upcoming year, or whatever period of time we'd be looking at in this planning process. From there, the agency would go back and establish a set of media objectives and strategies. In the traditional agency world, that would probably be communicated through account executives, through the account service department, through the client. There'd be some discussion, and then hopefully an approval of those objectives and strategies, so the next phase could begin, which is the plan development phase. That concludes Webinar 1, Part 1, the Media Planning Process, Introduction and Overview.